The year is 1989. The Detroit Lions haven't won a championship in 32 years and counting, having only made the playoffs 3 times in the last 3 decades, and losing all of them. It's hard to even think about the playoffs when you only finish with more wins than you did losses twice in the last 16 seasons. Simply put, the Lions were trash. But things were about to change. The Lions had just hired Wayne Fontes to take over as their new head coach, and were loaded with a top pick in the upcoming NFL draft to build their future around. There was one player in particular that began to catch Coach Fontes' attention. There was huge star power throughout college football, such as hotshot quarterback Troy Aikman at UCLA. But by the end of the year, everyone was talking about the junior running back from Oklahoma State. And he had just set a record by rushing for over 2,600 yards in a season. Suddenly, he was a Heisman winner, and would gain special permissions to become eligible as a junior for the upcoming NFL draft. In a draft loaded with talent such as Troy Aikman and Deion Sanders, there were plenty of options for the Lions to take a difference maker and finally change the fortunes of their floundering franchise. But Coach Fontes had his eyes dead set on one player, and with the 3rd overall pick in the 1989 NFL Draft, the Detroit Lions selected Barry Sanders.
There's Barry up the middle, 35, cuts to the right, 30, cuts it back over the middle, 20, to the 15, to the 10, to the 5, touchdown!
Sanders is as modest a superstar as I have ever met in all of sport.
Well, Dick, I think that's what makes it so great. He's so modest. When in doubt, give it to Barry. What a night for Barry Sanders.
A contract dispute before his rookie season would cause Sanders to miss training camp, and ultimately, by the time his deal was reached, it left Sanders with very little prep time before his first NFL game. With that in mind, the plan was to let Sanders sit on the bench for the first game and let him get adjusted to the NFL atmosphere. But like opening a new toy on Christmas morning, it became impossible to wait. The Lions were being beat, offense stagnating, the fans were getting anxious. It was time to unleash Barry Sanders. In an article for the Detroit Free Press recalling stories of Sanders' career, Lions assistant coach Dave Levy described the moment, saying, quote, "Wayne told me to take him down to the stadium and teach him plays, so I put some big bags out and had no intention of putting him in a football game. So we're playing the game, getting our ass beat, and in the 3rd quarter, Wayne calls me up and says, 'Let's put Barry in.' I said, 'God dang, Wayne, he only knows 3 plays.' And he said, 'Okay, we'll call those.' So we did." End quote. Sanders entered the game, rushed for 71 yards on just 9 carries, and scored the Lions' only touchdown. The legend of Barry Sanders was born. By the final game of Sanders' rookie season, he was already vying for the NFL rushing title. The game was against the Atlanta Falcons, and Sanders had already racked up 158 yards and 3 touchdowns in a blowout win. As he continued to inch closer and closer to leading the entire NFL in rushing yards as a rookie, a special phone was installed dedicated to keeping track of the current rushing leader, Christian Okoye of the Kansas City Chiefs. That way, the Lions were well aware of where Barry needed to reach to get the rushing title. But with the Lions so far ahead, Sanders found himself resting on the bench. Coach Fontes offered to put Sanders back into the game, in order to pencil in the last few yards Sanders needed for the crown. But that wasn't how Sanders operated. He would turn down the opportunity to steal away the rushing title, instead falling just 10 yards short. Records weren't important. He wasn't interested in artificially stat padding. The world was introduced to the real Barry Sanders. Winning games is what mattered. His level of play and giving all that he could on the field to win is what mattered to him. You didn't need large fanfare, you simply watched him play, and you know exactly how good he was. He didn't need a rushing title to speak for him. Barry's second season in the NFL continued a similar path to his rookie year. There was no sign of a sophomore slump. Barry continued to show not only did he belong in the NFL, but that he was already among the best. This time around, he did earn the NFL rushing title, with his 1,304 yards on the season. But of course, that meant very little to Barry Sanders. The Lions as a team had once again failed to obtain a winning record, finishing 6-11 on the year. But Barry isn't one to publicly call out his teammates, and he certainly wasn't one to make excuses. Instead, Barry continued to grind and continued to make sure that there was no one on the field who prepared harder than he did. And if he did that, assuredly, the results would come. The 1991 season didn't get off to the start Sanders was hoping for. He missed the season opener due to an injury, and without him, the Lions got blown out 45-0 against a dominant Washington Redskins squad. But with Sanders back the following week, the Lions would go on a 5-game winning streak, nearly tying their win total from the previous season before they even reached their bye week. However, the Lions would hit a rough patch in late October and early November of 1991. They'd lose 3 of their next 4 games. But infinitely more frightening than that, a career-ending injury would jolt the Lions during a Week 11 game against the Los Angeles Rams. Lions guard Mike Utley would suffer injuries to his cervical vertebrae in his neck during the fourth quarter. This injury would leave Utley paralyzed from the chest down. It was a sobering moment for the whole Lions organization. Sanders would dedicate his next game in Utley's name, and in doing so, ran for 220 yards and 4 touchdowns against the Minnesota Vikings. And from there, the Lions never slowed down. Barry Sanders would help lead the Lions to 12 wins, the first 12-win season in franchise history. And with that, the Lions secured a division title and the number 2 seed in the NFC, providing them with not only their first playoff berth since 1983, but a first-round bye straight to a divisional round showdown with the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys were a storied franchise with the Goliath offense featuring its own stud running back in Emmitt Smith. But it didn't matter. The crowd roared to life like it hadn't in decades, and the Lions destroyed the Cowboys 38-6, including an electrifying touchdown by Barry Sanders that would go down as one of the most iconic plays of his entire career. After being stuffed nearly all game, Sanders broke one free in the fourth quarter. A group of Cowboys defenders converged on him, attempting to tackle him, but somehow Sanders kept his balance and continued running, breaking the ankles of yet another Cowboys player before coasting into the end zone. The play personified the excitement in the stadium. The crowd was chanting it, and the players believed it. Barry Sanders and the Lions were ready for a Super Bowl, and were now only 1 game away. A contest against the best team in the entire NFL, the Washington Redskins, stood in their way. A team that had shut them out 45-0 in Week 1 of this season. But even with a healthy Barry Sanders this time around, Washington was too much to overcome. The Lions would once again be blown out, with a final score of 41-10. Barry Sanders had fallen 1 game short of every competitor's dream. The one silver lining in many eyes is that it was only year 3, and Barry and the Lions were only gonna get better. They would be back. Assuredly, they would. In 1992, Sanders rushed for 1,300 yards, good for 4th in the league. Also during this season, reminder only his 4th year in the NFL, Sanders broke the Lions' franchise record for career rushing yards, passing Billy Sims's 5,106 yards. But a reality check came quick for the Detroit Lions. Despite Barry continuing to put up another Pro Bowl season, the team as a whole fell to a 5-11 record, far from the heights of their championship appearance just a year earlier. The Lions got back on the horse for the 1993 season, winning the division with 10 wins and returning to the playoffs. However, it was a challenging year for Sanders, who would injure his PCL and MCL during a Week 13 matchup with the Chicago Bears, causing him to miss the last 5 games of the season. Yet, even after missing those 5 games, Sanders still finished with over 1,100 yards and ranked top 5 in rushing yards that year. Though down their star player, the Lions had managed to qualify for a wildcard playoff game. Determined not to miss a playoff opportunity, Sanders was cleared to return for the postseason. Coming off his injury, Sanders put up an impressive 169 yards against the Green Bay Packers in the wildcard round. Yet, despite this, the Lions lost 24-28. The 1994 season would perhaps give us a clue as to what a fully healthy season in 1993 would have looked like for Sanders. There were some down weeks, but as a whole, Sanders torched his opponents on his way to the NFL's Offensive Player of the Year award, rewarding his 1,883 yards rushing. One game in particular, against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, Sanders rushed for a career high and single-game franchise record 237 yards. With all of that being said, the Lions finished 9-7 that season, earning them a second consecutive wildcard appearance. This would be a rematch with the Green Bay Packers, who they had lost to the season prior. Unfortunately for Sanders and the Lions, the results remained the same. The Lions lost 12-16, and to make matters worse, Barry had one of the worst rushing performances of his career, finishing with a total of -1 yards. As a team, the Lions were held to -4 yards rushing. One might begin to believe the Lions were stuck in the movie Groundhog Day, as 1995 saw the same Lions story play out as it had the last few years. Barry Sanders put up a great year statistically, ending with 1,500 yards and 11 touchdowns, with the team winning 10 games and earning a wildcard spot. This time around, the Lions would go against the Philadelphia Eagles, and we all know at this point how this story ends. The Lions would go one and done in the playoffs, losing to the Eagles 58-37, but it wasn't even really that close. At one point, the Lions were facing a 51-7 deficit in the game. Sanders would only finish with 40 yards rushing in their wildcard loss. Now, before we take a look at the 1996 season, I'll let you guess how it's going to play out. If you guessed Sanders would lead the league in rushing with 1,553 yards and tacked on 11 touchdowns, you'd be correct. Although, unlike the last 3 seasons, we've got a curveball. The Lions only won 5 games and finished last in their division, instead of actually qualifying for the playoffs and subsequently losing in the wildcard round. Not exactly the changeup they were hoping for. The frustration in the Lions front office had hit a tipping point. The organization had seemed to have hit a brick wall, and after disappointment after disappointment, the Lions would fire head coach Wayne Fontes. This would upset Sanders, who was fond of Fontes, the coach who had championed for Sanders since draft day back in 1989. But ultimately, the team decided it was time to shake things up in search of postseason success, even if their star player disagreed. The team brought in new head coach Bobby Ross in 1997, and along with it, a new offense. The first 2 weeks looked bleak, as Sanders struggled to get going on the ground, only getting around 50 yards in each contest. But things slowly began to click, and Sanders was back to destroying opposing defenses. In Week 7 versus the Buccaneers, he rushed for 215 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then in Week 13, Barry put up another 216 yards and 2 touchdowns. And next thing you know, Sanders is only 131 yards short of the mythical 2,000-yard rushing season. Up to this point, only 2 players in the entire history of the NFL had rushed for 2,000 yards in a single season. The only thing that stood between Sanders and a 2,000-yard rushing season was Bill Parcells and Bill Belichick's New York Jets defense. But this historic accolade wasn't the only thing on the line. The Jets and the Lions both needed a win in order to qualify for the playoffs. What more drama could you ask for? The Lions would get off to a slow start, finding themselves down 10-3 at halftime, with Sanders sitting at only 20 yards, still 111 yards shy of that 2,000 yards. Passing the ball wasn't working, so they just started feeding Sanders, and Sanders went to work. He continued to fight for every yard until finally breaking one free for 47 yards at the end of the third quarter. At the top of the fourth, Sanders worked his way to another 9 yards and then punched it into the end zone on a 15-yard run to pull the Lions ahead of the Jets 13-10. Now with the lead, the only thing left to accomplish was milk the clock, get the playoff spot, and earn that coveted 2,000 yards rushing. Sanders began to receive handoff after handoff, clawing his way closer and closer. And then finally, with about 2 minutes left in the game, Barry pushed himself forward on a 2-yard rush and hit exactly 2,000 yards on the season, becoming the third player in all of NFL history to achieve the feat. And for safety, the very next play, Sanders broke off on a 53-yard scamper that not only safely passed 2,000 yards, but cemented their win and ticket to the playoffs. Because for as proud as Sanders was to achieve 2,000 yards, and as proud as he was to later learn that he was named NFL MVP and Offensive Player of the Year for his efforts that year, none of that would matter more than finally getting over the hump and winning playoff games, reaching the ultimate competitor's dream of competing in a Super Bowl. But some things just seem like they aren't meant to be. For as great as Barry Sanders was, he continued to be tortured by countless playoff collapses. Sanders was held to 67 yards rushing, and starting quarterback Scott Mitchell would be injured as the Lions lost 10-20 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in the playoffs. A dagger to the heart of the now 29-year-old Barry Sanders. He had not only rushed for 2,000 yards, but broke the NFL single-season scrimmage yard record. All that hard work, training, and sacrifice, what more did Sanders have to do to win? Unfortunately for Sanders, the daggers continued to come. Barry put up another great season in 1998, going for 1,491 yards rushing and 4 touchdowns, good for 4th best in the league. But the Lions as a whole regressed around him, finishing with a 5-11 record. Losing games gets old, but it wasn't the only thing the Lions were losing. Staples and leaders of the locker room were being allowed to walk out the doors, leaving behind a vacancy of leadership and veteran talent. And along with it, many of the strong relationships Barry had built over the years with longtime teammates, such as center Kevin Glover, were now gone. This began to weigh heaviest on Sanders' mind. Now 10 years in, and the team was still in the same position it had always been in. But then couple that with Barry now sitting at 30 years old, and memories of severe injuries to teammates Mike Utley years earlier, and a recent injury to linebacker Reggie Brown that left him paralyzed on the field following a tackle in that 1997 game against the Jets. I can't get fully into the mind of Barry Sanders, but personally, I'd have to say at least a small part of him considered the thought of continuing to put his body on the line only for the Lions organization to continue spinning its wheels. Was it worth the risk of causing serious, lasting harm to his body? In Sanders' eyes, veteran talent was jettisoned, and the Lions were just as far from a Super Bowl as they had ever been. And when you combine that with the absolute grind of keeping his level of excellence and the risk he takes every time he steps on the field as he gets older, Sanders was left dejected. The time had come, and he knew it. His time with the Lions was over. On July 27, 1999, Barry Sanders sent a fax to his hometown newspaper announcing his retirement from the National Football League. He would then hop on a flight to London and spend time there to get away and avoid the chaos that was sure to follow the announcement of his retirement. It was a time for Sanders to clear his head and get ready for something he hadn't experienced in a very long time: life without football. With it all said and done, Barry Sanders finished 1,457 yards away from the all-time NFL rushing title held by Walter Payton at the time of his retirement. Sanders still sits 4th all-time in career rushing yards, despite only playing 10 years. The 3 players above him on the list all-time played at least 3 or more seasons longer than Sanders. If you were to break down every running back in NFL history to just their first 10 years of their career, Barry Sanders would lead all of them. But records weren't a factor for Sanders. Retiring so close to the all-time record ultimately didn't matter. His individual greatness of play is what mattered. Just like his rookie year, when he bypassed the season rushing title, when he could have easily taken it, what mattered more was his performance on the field. It did the talking. And if you listened to what it had to say, the message was loud and clear. Barry Sanders was the greatest running back of all time. It's my personal opinion that Barry Sanders is the most talented running back in NFL history. Do you agree? Or does somebody else deserve that title? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video and would like to see more content like this, be sure to let me know by giving this video a like and subscribing to stay notified of future uploads. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.